let's set the scene. You're nervously waiting to walk down the aisle. But forget butterflies and cold feet. Your biggest worry is that at the age of 12, your parents already traded you away to lock down a business deal. Tomorrow isn't about love or promises. It's about profit, politics, and peril. And your special night? Imagine a crowd cheering you toward the marital bed. Not out of joy, but to ensure your value as family currency is properly exchanged. Sound like something from a horror novel? Welcome to the world of medieval marriages, where the phrase "till death do us part" was less a poetic promise and more a blunt, matter-of-fact prediction. Trust me, whatever gripes you have about breakups or ghostings on dating apps, our ancestors would have swapped places in a heartbeat. If you stick with me until the end, you'll realize just how lucky we are to swipe, scroll, and match on our own terms. But brace yourself, because this isn't just history. It's a waking nightmare with real people, real consequences, and some wild stories you won't believe. Let's start with the story of Margaret Beaufort, whose childhood was anything but idyllic. While most 6-year-olds fussed about snacks and storybooks, Margaret's guardians engineered her first marriage as a pawn in a high-stakes real estate match. She was clueless, of course. The ink hadn't even dried on her marriage contract when shifting allegiances scrapped it and sold her off again. At this point, she was all of 12. Her new husband, a grown man of 24 named Edmund Tudor. And here's a stomach-churning fact. While church law, in theory, said a girl should be 14 before living as man and wife, powerful men like Edmund ignored the rules. Margaret was pregnant within the year. A child forced to become a mother. Margaret wasn't alone. In 1396, Frances Princess Isabella of Valois, just a little girl of 6, still playing with dolls, was married to the King of England. Her wedding agreement delayed consummation until she turned 12. But the arrangement was as calculated as it was cold-blooded. Here's the thing. These weren't bizarre exceptions or family drama gone wrong. This was the playbook for the aristocracy. Daughters were less beloved children and more like life insurance policies, cashed in before fate or disease could rob the family blind. The upper crust dealt in dowries and alliances. The church's guidelines? Conveniently flexible when power and money were on the line. But before we paint the whole era in gloom, know this. In the countryside, among peasants and tradespeople, marriages looked pretty different. Most folks married late teens or 20s, when you could help run the farm, not the family empire. But for girls born with land or a noble title, innocence and childhood were luxuries no one could afford to keep. And then there was the wedding night, less a romantic getaway, more a medieval reality show. Welcome to the bedding ceremony. First, the crowd herds you into the bedroom. Ladies in waiting, and sometimes nosy aunts, undress the bride, comb her hair, and tuck her beneath the sheets, passing along sage advice or just embarrassing jokes. But the awkwardness doesn't stop there. The couple's friends would toss their stockings at the newlyweds. A raucous game believed to predict who'd marry next. Surprisingly, this still beats some modern wedding games for weirdness. And then, for the high and mighty, witnesses would wait outside the bed curtains, demanding evidence that the union was, shall we say, fruitful. Because if the marriage wasn't consummated, it couldn't be declared null and void. Alliances evaporated, fortunes lost, and reputations trashed. The pressure? Unbearable. Here's an interesting footnote. In some corners of medieval Europe, This bizarre tradition faded over time. Royalty grew tired of prying eyes. King Charles I literally locked his bedroom door on his wedding night. Still, the memory lingered, especially for girls like Isabella of Valois, whose bedding ceremony as a child bride was a cold, public rite, stripping away whatever was left of her innocence. But whatever the setting, whether it was small-town England or the grand halls of France, the message was always the same. Women's bodies weren't their own. They were proof, property, and public business. All this before the next chapter, the deadliest of all, began. If you thought the wedding night was a trial, childbirth was an outright gamble. Women didn't just risk pain. Childbirth could kill you, and it often did. Back to Margaret Beaufort. At 13, after a brutal pregnancy and the death of her husband to the plague, she made a perilous winter journey to give birth alone. Her confessor wrote it was a miracle she and her son survived, and history bore him out. The trauma left her unable to have more children. She was lucky to be alive. The cost was pregnant. Take the stats. 1 in 3 women died as a result of pregnancy or childbirth. That's far higher than anything today's daredevils face jumping off cliffs or racing cars. Forget hospitals. Childbirth meant bloodletting, crude birthing chairs, or, if you were unlucky, a grim parade of superstitions and prayers. Noble women didn't escape the terror. Isabella of Aragon, dead at 18 following a nightmare labor. Eleanor of Aquitaine, strong, savvy, and among the most powerful women of her time, endured 10 harrowing pregnancies. Producing children wasn't just a hope, it was a demand. If you survived, you were expected to get pregnant again and again and again, until you couldn't, or until you died. And if there were fertility problems, the finger pointed only one way, at the wife. It's a small miracle anyone survived at all. So let's say you beat the odds. You survived childhood, your wedding, childbirth. Now, welcome to married life, where, for better or worse, was mostly about the worse. The law gave husbands staggering power. Under reasonable chastisement, a man could discipline his wife as he saw fit, so long as the stick wasn't thicker than his thumb. Ever heard the phrase, rule of thumb? It's said to come from here, though historians debate it. But the violence wasn't always that subtle. Remember Henry VIII? He didn't just set the standard for marital drama. He set the bar impossibly low. When his wives didn't give him a male heir, he found reasons, real or invented, to execute them. Anne Boleyn was destroyed by fabricated accusations. Catherine Howard, barely older than a modern college student, met the same fate. And these weren't Mad King exceptions. They were the logical conclusion of marriage laws that made women legal non-persons. Everything the wife owned became her husband's. She couldn't testify, inherit, or, in the eyes of the court, even suffer an injustice unless her father or husband acknowledged it. Divorce? Next to impossible. If you wanted out, you had to prove the marriage was never real in the first place, which often meant humiliating physical exams to prove you were still a virgin. What's truly chilling is how many women, fully aware of the risks, still saw marriage as their only lifeline. Unmarried women faced even darker fates: poverty, forced religious life, or outright starvation. Think your in-laws are obsessed with money? With dowries, medieval families put modern gift registries to shame. Style hint: A lavish medieval parlor stacked with chests of coins, jewelry, fine fabrics, and documents. Nervous parents haggle with an imposing matchmaker over the fate of a reluctant-looking daughter in elegant clothes. The room is filled with opulence and tension. No text over image. A daughter was expensive. Some families negotiated for years, parting with fortunes just to marry her off. Isabella deEste's family had to fork over what today would be hundreds of thousands just to secure a match. And all those sacrifices, once married, her entire dowry became her husband's property. If the husband died, even widows, supposedly honored, could be left destitute, the family inheritance scooped up by distant male relatives. Many women shifted from marriage to marriage or cloistered to convents, desperately seeking security. The lucky few, like Margaret Beaufort, found ways to manipulate the system and walk away powerful. But most spent their lives at the mercy of men and markets. Marrying for love? That was an unaffordable luxury. Marriage was a transaction, and women were the goods. And here's the dark twist. These marriages rarely went the distance. Thanks to war, illness, and above all, the perils of childbirth, an average medieval marriage lasted little more than 15 years. Not because love faded, but because death stepped in. So accepted was the idea of death as a fact of marriage that wedding ceremonies included prayers for the couple's souls, emphasizing not the joys of union, but the likelihood of early loss. Marriage, remarriage, step-siblings, medieval family trees tangled fast. You could have a half-dozen step-parents or siblings before you were grown. Attachment became risky. Losing loved ones was expected, yet people persisted. Marriage, flawed and dangerous as it was, beat the risks of going solo in a hostile world. Even widowhood provided more safety than singlehood. So next time you're frustrated with a bad date or a swiped left heartbreak, remember, just a few centuries ago, love was the least of anyone's worries. Surviving the whole ordeal, now that was the real achievement. If you found this look at history's grimmest wedding traditions eye-opening or bone-chilling, why not hit the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories that make you grateful for your place in history. Because honestly, modern dating, ghosting, awkward coffee dates, and all really doesn't seem so bad after all, does it? Thanks for sticking with me through this brutal journey. I'll see you in the next one, where history gets even stranger.